right, let's talk training. So I'm going to give it about 30 seconds to a minute to let some people tune in before we get it rolling. But guys, today we are talking about training. We are talking about basically how to structure your training a little bit, digging into that a little bit. And more so, we are talking about a very important misconception I hear a lot of athletes struggle with, and that is more does not equal better. And basically, the idea behind this episode, when we get into it, is we're going to talk about the difference between just trying to train more and actually building a program that makes sense, actually building a program that's going to be helpful. So, yeah, because that's something I see a lot of athletes struggle with. They think just the harder I work, the better my results will be. And guys, it's just not true. Like, don't get me wrong. That's not me saying hard work's not important, but it's just not do more work, get better result. That's just not how this system functions. So let's talk about it. We're going to get into it. We're going to get going in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the #1 show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I'm your host, Kenny Dussault, and today we are talking about how more does not equal better. And I'm bringing this to you guys because this is something I hear athletes say all the time. You know, you have a competition and it doesn't go your way. And the first instinct is, well, I just need to double down and I just need to do twice as much. You know, I just need to go on twice as many runs, lift twice as many weights, do twice as many reps, practice twice as many hours, then it'll go my way. And guys, the problem with that insight, don't get me wrong, from the one side, I respect that mentality because you're like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But the problem with that insight is there's just so many hours in a day. You know what I mean? Like, there's just so many hours in a day. Like, if you start just doubling up every single time you have a setback, every single time you have a bad day, you're going to literally run out of possible training hours. And the other part of that that's a problem is your body's not meant to go every single hour of the day. There's this thing called recovery that allows you to keep functioning for longer that you need to actually start investing some time into. So we're going to talk about how to actually do it right. Because let's get back into that scenario. You just had a competition. It didn't go your way. Your first instinct is, I just need to work twice as hard to make sure this never happens again. Now, I want you to break that down. If you think, I just need to go on twice as many runs. Let's say you're running, and again, I use the running example because I know so many of you out there are still doing it, even though it is not the most beneficial thing for you to be doing. But let's say you're going on 5-mile runs 3 times a week. And I say that as like, honestly, a conservative estimate, because that is a lot less than I see a lot of people doing. And you have a setback, and then you decide, okay, now instead of 5 miles 3 times a week, I'm going to do 5 miles 5 times a week. Think about what you're preparing for. If you're preparing for, let's say, a 3 5-minute round fight, and your plan is to just run for 5 miles 5 times a week to prepare for that, think about what's going into those runs versus what goes into that fight. What's going into the runs is, working hard, keeping yourself at that high, steady pace to be able to, try to beat your time every single time you're out there. But what goes into the fight is high pace, explosive power, speed, and then stepping back, circling, and then jumping back in again, and then potentially grappling exchanges, clinch exchanges. It's all different types of energy the whole entire time you're fighting. So if you feel like you did your 3 5-mile runs a week and it didn't prepare your gas tank in time, the answer is not more of the same stuff. The answer is changing what you're doing. Because insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you're just continuing to do the same thing, but just do more and more and more and more of the same thing, you're not going to get a different result. It's the same thing with the skills training. If you are doing your skills training, let's say, again, pulling examples and numbers out of nowhere here. So don't take it as I'm telling you this is the exact amount of time you need to skills train. But let's say your skills training 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. Because if you are doing that already, that is plenty of time. Like, you don't need to do more than that. So if you go in training 6 hours, 6 days a week, 2 hours a day, and you're like, oh man, I went into my fight and I didn't feel like my skills were good enough. It's not go in 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, and just do more of it. You need to look at what you're doing within those 2 hours a day and improve upon it. Right. So instead of just like, okay, I gotta, hit the bag for an extra 30 minutes after every session, and I've got to do, 5 more pad sessions every single week, and I got to do this, sit back and ask yourself, what went wrong? Sit back and ask yourself, okay, when I was fighting, what skill felt like wasn't up to par? Was it your defense? Like, oh, he caught you with some, shots that you felt like you shouldn't have gotten caught with? Well, then instead of I need to do twice as many hours of training, say I need to spend more of my time in my training focusing on my defense. Right. And the same thing with the conditioning work. If you feel like, my lungs felt good, but my muscles were, really burning by the time the third round came around, don't just say, okay, I'm going to do the same conditioning, but I'm going to do twice as much of it. Start thinking, okay, that means my muscle endurance is lacking. Right? So if my muscle endurance is lacking, what kind of thing do I need to do to improve on my muscle endurance? Right? Because if you just try to always add more, then you end up, first of all, running out of time. Because like I said, there's only 24 hours in a day. You need to sleep. You need to recover. You probably need to work or, do something outside of just the sport. But also your body's going to burn itself out. Right? Because in your mind, oh, I'm just working harder. And when I work harder, I'm going to get a better result. But if you just always only try to work harder, eventually your body's like, hey, dude, I'm done. And then it starts falling apart. So instead of taking the approach of what can I add, what can I add, what can I add, start asking yourself what you can change. If you're hitting the bag for, this is one of my favorite ones because I see this kind of thing all the time. Athletes will come to me and be like, I hit the bag every day after practice for an hour. I'm like, okay, what do you work on while you're doing that? They're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, like, what are you trying to improve when you're hitting the bag for an hour every day? And they don't have an answer. Because if you're just going and hitting the bag, I'm just going to strap my gloves on and go, and then just hit the bag for an hour, you're not getting better at anything. You get what I'm saying? You're not improving anything just because you're going through the motions of it. But if you took that time down to 30 minutes and you're like, okay, for 10 minutes, I'm just going to practice this combination, and again, pick whichever combinations are working for you. But for 10 minutes, I'm just going to work on this specific thing. And I feel like every time I throw this punch, I need to work on my head getting out of the way. And again, I'm not a skills coach, so I'm not going to try to break down, exactly what you should be doing on a bag. But if you take down the time, but you actually give yourself an intentional practice for that time, you're going to get way better result in way less time. Right? But people get so stuck in like, oh, but, I need to show that I'm the hardest worker in the room, so I'm going to hit the bag for an hour every day. But if you're not improving in that hour, then it doesn't matter. Cool, you could puff your chest out and tell everybody how hard you worked, but if you get your ass kicked the next time you fight, who cares? Right? So take the time down and put intention behind it. And it's the same thing with your conditioning. So you guys, when it comes to conditioning for sport, you've got to understand what a fight really is. And again, I'm talking purely from the conditioning standpoint. What a fight really is, you've got to be fast. You've got to be explosive. You've got to be strong, because if you're clinching up, if you're grappling or anything like that, that takes a lot of strength to be able to do that repeatedly for the duration of 3 to 5 rounds. And I'm speaking in MMA terms, but boxers, kickboxers, jiu-jitsu athletes, whoever you are, understand these things apply to you as well. It's just, instead of me having to try to incorporate every single combat sport every time I talk, I'm going to speak as if I'm speaking to an MMA fighter. But if you're a boxer, obviously don't think grappling, but you still need to be fast. You still need to be strong. You still need to be explosive, and you still need to be able to repeat that for 3 to however many rounds you're fighting. right? So when it comes to the conditioning work, it's not just about how hard can I work. It's about how strong can I get? How explosive can I be? How well conditioned can I be to repeat those hard explosive efforts through the entire duration of my fight? You know what I mean? So it's not just who can do the most reps, but it's what you get out of the reps. Because if athlete A and athlete B are doing a conditioning session, and athlete A does 3 times as many rounds of the conditioning session as athlete B, but athlete B is truly trying to be at 100% explosive power every single time they're doing it, and athlete A is just getting through the rounds, athlete B is getting more result from that time and recovering easier because they're not burning themselves out with extra rounds at a shitty pace. You guys get what I mean? So it's about taking away the thought of how hard can I go and start thinking about what am I actually getting out of it? Is this session that I'm doing improving my power, improving my speed, improving my ability to repeat explosive, fast efforts for the duration of my fight? Yes, keep doing what you're doing. No, stop it, because you're not doing conditioning just because you're working hard. You're doing conditioning when you're actually building the physical qualities you need to step into the fight and be better. So every single thing you do while you're training needs to be reflective of that. Like, this is something I tell all my athletes. So every athlete that I work with is on a training app. And I always tell my athletes they should be able to scroll through the program that I have for them, click on an exercise and say, why is this beneficial? And if I don't have an answer, that's a problem. But a lot of conditioning coaches out there, they'll throw these random fucking bullshit workouts together. And then when the athlete says, oh, why are we doing this? They'll go, well, because it's fucking hard. It's like, fucking cool. Like, that's not an answer. Just because it's hard is not a reason that's actually going to help you perform. So you need to start thinking about how can I add more to my training, and you need to start thinking about how can I improve my training, because those are two very different questions. And if you're only thinking about what you can add, you're not going to get the same type of result, but also even worse, you're going to start burning your body out because you're going to be doing too much, not getting a result from it, and then starting to just slowly but surely burn yourself out over time. So guys, what I want you to take away from this more than anything, like I just said, is think about what you can change instead of thinking about what you can add, and actually focus on the intention behind the training you're doing instead of just how much training can I do. Because one of my absolute favorite quotes about training that I've ever heard was my good friend Jeff Lavecchio. He trains hockey players in St. Louis, I believe, somewhere right around St. Louis. And his quote that I always love coming back to is, more training doesn't equal better training equals better training, right? Because if you're doing less but the quality of it is increased, you're going to get a better result than the person who's just trying to grind more out. And right, and that ego kicks in that tells you, well, I just need to grind harder, grind harder, grind harder. But you got to remember what you're training for. You're not training just to show how hard you can grind. You're training to succeed in a sport. And if you're not succeeding in the sport, all the grinding you're doing isn't getting you the result you want anyway. So why are you doing it? So make sure you're thinking about quality. Stop thinking just about quantity. Stop thinking about what you can add and start thinking about what you can change. So guys, that is it. That is all. I hope you got some value from that. If you did, I would love to know what you took away. So shoot me a message across any of my social media platforms. The link on how to do that will be in the show notes right below. I appreciate you all for taking the time to tune in, whether you're here right now or on the replay. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, whatever day it is you're listening to this, and I will catch you on the next episode. All right, guys. I can stay for a couple minutes to do a little bit of Q&A. So if you have questions,